Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello dear learners, welcome to the session of Managerial Economics. I am Dr. Supriya Jain, working as an assistant professor in the Institute of Business Management at GLA University, Mathura. So before we talk about today's lecture, let us look at the topics which we have discussed in our previous session, and we have talked about oligopoly market. We have seen the different features of this market, as well as we have seen how the prices and output are being determined under oligopoly market structure through different theories. Oligopoly is a market where we have very few dominant players, and the products which they sell can be the homogeneous products or there can be a differentiated product. So, if the companies who are selling under this oligopoly market structure, if the products are differentiated, are of heterogeneous nature, then we call it as a differentiated oligopoly, whereas the firms producing the same kind of products which are of homogeneous nature would be considered as an example of pure oligopoly. And the most important feature of this market is that there is an interdependence of the firm. That means whatever the firms decide, they need to take into account the considerable impact of their change on the demand as well as the price of the their competing firm. So, these are the basic features of oligopoly market, and here in this oligopoly market the demand curve is indeterminate. Like we have talked about, under perfect competition, the demand curve is perfectly elastic, and we have shown it like we draw it is like horizontal to the x axis, right. It is parallel to the x axis because the demand is perfectly elastic in nature in the perfect competitive market. Whereas in monopoly the demand is highly inelastic, because here the product does not have a close substitute, and here the monopoly is the single seller in the market. Whereas in case of monopolistic competitive market, we have seen that the price is highly elastic in nature, right, and therefore the demand curve is downward sloping, but a little flatter than in case of monopoly, right, because here in the monopolistic competitive market there are different substitutes available. But when we talk about oligopoly market, here the demand curve cannot be determined because of the products which are being sold by the players in the oligopoly market. So, to understand the price and output determination under this market, we have talked about different models, right. Like we have Nick demand curve model, which is also called as price rigidity model, and the understanding of this model given by Professor Paul Sweezy, right. According to it, we can see that how price rigidity will be there in this market, right. It is better for the firms operating under this oligopoly market should follow a pricing strategy which is being determined by all the firms together, right, because if individual firm will try to increase the price, the competing firm will not increase it or might not follow it. So, in that case that firm will lose the customer, right, and which represent the demand will be of elastic nature, right. And if the firm independently reduces the price, then the other firms will follow the same, right, and this will not give any change in the demand of the consumer. Rather, this will create a kind of a price war situation which is not beneficial for either of the firm, right. So, in this model we have seen that the demand has a kind of a nicked shape, and that is why this has been named as a Nick demand curve. Then we have tried to understand it with the help of price leadership model, and this model explained that usually the oligopoly firm chooses a leaders among them, right, and this leading firm can be chosen on base of different criteria, maybe a firm who is operating at the optimum level or producing the highest margin in the market, highest output in the market, or having a highest profit margin. So, there can be different criteria which can be used to choose a leading firm, and as per the decision taken by the leading firm, the other firms will follow. Then we have talked about this Coronaught model. Augustin Coronaught gave this model, and this model explained that usually we consider this model in case of duopoly when there are two firms and there are certain assumptions for the understanding of this model which we have discussed in our last lecture, right. And this model suggested that if there are two firms and if firm 1 A firms enter into the market, it will enter early into the market, right, and will capture half of the output or half of the demand of the total demand in the market, and then the other firm will also enter and they will start producing the output, keeping into consideration that firm A will continue its output what they were continue producing earlier. So, this model is basically based on certain assumption, and without that assumption it will be difficult for us to understand this Coronaught model, and it is also applicable in the oligopoly market. But one thing which we have to understand here is whether there are two firms or there are three firms or maybe four firms in the market, there will always be the output producing by all the firms will be 1 upon n plus 1, right. So, this is how we understand this price and output determination under the oligopoly market through Coronaught model. Then we have talked about Stackelberg's model. Stackelberg model is a kind of an extension given to this Coronaught model where we try to find out the equilibrium, right. Through the Coronaught model we try to find out the equilibrium and we find out which of the firm is more sophisticated, right. So, the firm who is producing the output in a more sophisticated manner, the other firm will follow, right. And if you think that both the firms are trying to behave sophisticatedly, then in that case again there will be a problem of price war. So, it will always be better we will choose a firm who is behaving more sophisticatedly and the other firm is going to follow the firm which is doing better in the market or which is leading in the market. And then we have also seen this cartel model as because there are few dominant players in the market of oligopoly. So, what another way they can go ahead with is forming a cartel, right. They can form a cartel or they can make a collusion, right, where they can join together or combine together and they can also behave like a monopoly. And we know monopoly is a situation where they can have a control over the supply and they can take various advantages of it, right. So, what happens usually when they make a cartel or they make a collusion, in that case they determine their demand and output together, but as being they are different producers, they have to produce their output in their own production houses, and because of which there will be a difference in the cost of production. So, some of the firm will earn supernormal profit or maybe some of the firms are earning only normal profit. So, that kind of a difference in their profit will create differences among these firms and they might not be able to continue with these cartels for a longer period of time, right. And cartel can be done in two different ways also. There can be a centralized cartel or there can be a market share cartel. In case of centralized cartel, they make the decisions at the central level, whatever they are deciding, whatever the decisions they are making, they do it togetherly through sitting at the centralized level, right. Whereas in a market share they divide the market, right, they divide or distribute the market shares among themselves and then they take up their own independence decisions considering their own market share, right. So, this is what we have covered in our previous lecture about the oligopoly, how oligopoly market works and what are the different features this market has, right. Now, let us look at the learning objective of today's session, what we are going to cover today, right. Here in this lecture you will be able to introduce the rationale behind different pricing decisions of the firm. Now, this is very important for us to understand regarding the pricing, right. We have understood the different market structure, we have seen the degree of competition, we have talked about the demand and its determinants, how it affects the demand of any commodity, and keeping there we have also seen the effect of price, because price is something which majorly affects the demand of any commodity. So, basically we are going to introduce here the pricing strategies and the pricing policies, okay, so that the firm will be able to generate their revenues as well as sale. So, here the introduction of this topic is behind the rationale of different pricing decisions which are being taken up by the firm, and you will also be able to understand the pricing based on different categories, that is the cost based pricing, value based pricing, perception based pricing. So, there are different kind of pricing strategies based on different categories we are going to explore. Then you will also be able to relate the product life stage as well as the different phases of business cycle with pricing decision. right? How when the product moves to the different stages. So, at the different stages what should be the different pricing strategies a producer should follow, and looking at the different cycles of the business, right, because economy faces different kind of phases. There can be an expansion phase, there can be a contraction phase. So, during those phases what impact does it take on the pricing of the commodity, that we are also going to relate here. And lastly, we will also see the effect of administrator pricing on the general pricing policy, right. So, this is what we are going to talk here in our this class regarding the pricing strategies as well as the policy. So, let us first start with what is meant by the product pricing, right. Product pricing, you can say, is basically the price which a customer is going to pay for the product for which he or she wants to buy, and the price is basically that thing where the seller is ready to sell the commodity which a seller is ready to sell. So, basically what we are saying, price denote two aspects, right, and what are those two aspects? The first is revenue to the seller, right. It gives revenue to the seller because this is the way they are going to generate their profit, and it is the perceived value of goods to the buyer, right. And buyer is basically looking at the value of that particular product and how much they are valuing, because everything, the purchase of any commodity requires the sacrifice, right. So, if you want to satisfy yourself, right, and to have the utility after the consumption of goods and services, you need to make a sacrifice, and that sacrifice we make in terms of money, right, and money related to the price of that commodity. So, what value that commodity is going to give you, how much you will be able to satisfy your utility, right, or how much satisfaction you are going to get with the consumption of that commodity is very much depends upon the value of that commodity which is related to the price, right. So, these are the two aspects which are being denoted by the price, and we can also say that price determines the sales revenue of the firm, market share as well as the profit, right. So, this is one decision which needs to be taken up very carefully by any producer, because this is going to represent the value of their product in the market share they are going to capture, and how much sales they would be able to generate, right. Moving ahead, let us look to the question then, what should be the right price for a product? That since we are going to talk about the price in detail, but how are we going to identify that what will be the right price for a product, right? How are we going to choose that correct price for a commodity? So, here the answer to this question is, if we are able to satisfy all our stakeholders, then that price should be considered to be a right price, right. So, a right price is a one which keeps all your stakeholders happy, right, and stakeholders means all those people who are somewhere or the other associated with your business, right, or with your organization, like consumer. Consumers will be happy if they got value for the money, right. Keeping that much of price of your commodity where consumer will be satisfied enough, because they will feel like that they have got value for their money, whatever the amount they have paid, at least they are able to satisfy that much of their satisfaction with the consumption of that commodity. On the other hand, we see that the sellers are also happy because they are also able to generate their desired volume of sales, right, and the sales is going to give them the earning. And on the other hand, we are saying shareholders should always also be happy because they have made their investments, they have invested their money, so they are looking for higher profits. So, the right price will be the price where the stakeholders of the company are satisfied, they feel happy, like whatever is being given to them in terms of perspective of customer or the seller or the shareholders, they all are getting what they are looking for, right. So, now let us look at the dimensions of pricing decisions. Before we talk about the different pricing strategies, let us look at the dimensions. What are the dimensions which are needed to be taken care of before we determine or decide the pricing strategy for a particular product? So, the first is a new or a modified product pricing. Yes, it is very important whenever we are introducing a new product to the market, when our product is new, right. So, at that time we need to take care of many aspects. what are the things we need to take into consideration to introduce the new product in the market, right? We have to see whether the product is having the close substitute or not, or whether the same kind of product is available in the market or not. So, there are different considerations needed to be taken care of, and not only in the case of new product when we are introducing, this pricing policy has to be taken up whenever we are making any change to our existing product. If we are modifying our product, right, maybe in terms of their packaging only, right, then also we need to think of the right pricing strategy to go ahead with. Next is a new market or a new segment, right. If suppose you want to enter into a new market, the product is already existing, but now you are exploring a new market for your product, or a new market segment. Maybe earlier you were only targeting a segment of a people from that market. Maybe your product is only oriented towards women, and now you are targeting your product to be also desirable for the men or maybe for kids, right. So, if you are looking for a new market or new market segment, then also you have to think very carefully regarding the pricing of your commodity. Then you have to take into account the consumer buying capacity for sure, what target audience it is, right. Are you targeting the people who are having a higher income groups, or you are targeting the people with the lower income groups, right. So, the buying capacity of the consumer plays a very important role, and that gives you a fair idea of how you should be going ahead with the pricing of your commodity. Then the objective of the firms plays important role. We have also covered about the objective of the firm, and the firms have different sort of objectives, right. Some firms are the objective is to maximize their profit. Some of them are focusing on sales maximization, some have the objective of growth maximization. So, depending upon the objective of the firm also affects the pricing policy of that organization. Then cost of production, as we all know, is a very important consideration, right. Whatever the goods and services we are producing, that involves the cost of production, right, and cost of production includes the cost of factors of production which we are using for the production, like land, labor, capital, entrepreneur, whatever it is, right. So, that definitely is an important consideration, because no producer is willing to sell at a price lower than the cost of production, because that will give a loss to them. So, definitely this cost of production has to be taken into account. Then change in demand, right. Change in demand is also been taken up, how the price demand of that commodity is being affected with the price of that commodity. And we have also understood the elasticities. We have also talked about how the shifts in demand curve and movements on demand curve take place, what are the different factors and how these factors are going to affect the demand. And here, as we all know, price plays a very important role, right. Price is one of the most important determinant which affects the demand of any commodity. Okay. And we have also seen the effect of market structure, right, the degree of competition. Since we have seen that in a monopoly market there is no substitute available, monopolist is the single seller in the market. So, here he has this independency where a monopolist can determine the prices as per his own choice, and he does not have to consider much of the things, because the substitutes are not available and there is no competition in the market. But in case of monopolistic competitive market, as well as in the case of oligopoly market, a due consideration has to be taken up on the degree of competition, because the products which are being sold here are the substitutes, right. In case of oligopoly, the substitutes are more close, right, the products are more closely associated if there is a case of pure oligopoly, right. Whereas in monopolistic competitive market there is a kind of a monopoly, but yes, at the same time there is a competition. So, they also have to take into account the pricing very carefully, looking at the competition in the market. Then we have elasticity of demand. Yes, elasticity also plays a very important role, because some products are of elastic nature and some products are of inelastic nature, right. And we have seen this factors also, like elasticity depends on various factors, maybe because of the nature of commodity, right. Like we have talked about, durable goods are of inelastic nature, and usually the recurring demand goods, right, the goods which have recurring demand, right, they are of inelastic nature, because people are demanding them, even them on the higher prices. Whereas the consumer durable goods which can be which demands can be postponed for the longer period of time are of elastic nature, right. Time period also plays a very important role in determining the elasticity, right, whether the product is of elastic nature or inelastic nature. We usually say the product in a short run is of inelastic nature, whereas the product in the long run will be of elastic nature. So, how this elasticity concepts help you in determining the pricing policy of your commodity, and usually we say if the product is of inelastic nature, then in that case we can go with the higher pricing strategy, because in that case there will not be much impact on the demand of our commodity even if the prices we are charging are high. Whereas in case if the product which we are selling is of elastic nature, then definitely we should go with the lower pricing strategy, because in this case the lower the prices will be, the more will be the demand, right. And lastly, we have government policies as well, right. Government policies also plays a very important role, because government has two consideration, one is of subsidies and the second is of taxes, right. So, depending upon the tax policy and the subsidies they are providing to the producers, the pricing policies will get affected a lot, right. So, these are some dimensions which a person need to be taken into account before they are going ahead with the pricing policies of their commodity. Now, looking forward, we have different criterias. Like I said, we have taken different criterias for taking up the pricing policies. So, here we are going to start with the very first one. We have cost based pricing, right. And as we all know, cost is something which is very important to be taken up into account, right. Before we go ahead with the price of any commodity, we need to take into account the cost of production, how much costing of the product has been charged to us, and accordingly we are going to price our product. So, here under this category of choice based pricing, we have cost plus, which is also called as markup pricing, and we can also call this as an average cost pricing method. Whereas, the second is called as marginal cost pricing. Marginal cost pricing is also called as variable cost pricing, and the third one we have here is target return pricing. Now, let us talk about the very first one, which is cost plus pricing. It is one of the simplest way of pricing your commodity, where you are considering the average cost of the commodity. I hope average cost is clear to every one of you. Average cost is the summation of average fixed cost plus average variable cost, and this is the cost we actually took into account to find out how much output we should produce, where we have seen the equilibrium point also, the point where marginal revenue and marginal cost of the company is equal. That is the equilibrium point, and that helps us to find out how much output a firm should start beginning. But when we talk about price, we are considering this average cost of any commodity, that is the cost per unit, right. So, that cost we find out initially, and then we add the markup to it, right. So, the basically what formula we are going to use here is to calculate this cost plus or markup pricing. We calculate it by using AC plus M, right. AC is the average cost of that product, that is the cost per unit, and M refers to the markup, what markup we are going to add to it, like what kind of return we want to get on that particular commodity, right. So, all these things you take into account, and then you decide that markup, what markup will be used for what return you want, right, what rate of return you are expecting on the product which you want to add to the cost of your commodity. Accordingly, you charge the price for the commodity. So, this is one of the oldest and the simplest way of using this for pricing the product of your commodity, to look at the average cost of your product, right, average cost, which comprises of fixed as well as variable cost both, and then you add a markup to it, like what return you are expecting on your investments. So, you add that markup to it, and then you determine the prices of your commodity. Then we have marginal cost pricing. This marginal cost pricing is actually related to the incremental principle. If you guys remember, initially we have talked about the fundamental principles in economics, and there we have talked about the incremental cost, right. Incremental cost is the cost of increasing cost is called as incremental cost. Whatever the change you are making in your business activity, right. Because of that, if your cost increases, that would be called as incremental cost. And here in this marginal cost principle, what we are doing, we usually take into account for the pricing policy the variable cost, not the fixed cost, right. So, here in the cost plus pricing, we are considering the average fixed cost and average variable cost both for the consideration of pricing, whereas in marginal cost pricing, we usually do not calculate the fixed cost, we keep it we do not keep this into consideration, we only calculate the cost on the basis of average variable cost. What increased cost will be there, right? What will be the increased cost if we are going to make certain changes? On the basis of that, we usually keep the pricing of our commodity. Now, this is one method which is only applicable in the short run, right? You will not be able to calculate, or you won't be able to keep this pricing policy for a longer period of time, because ultimately there will be a fixed cost, and if you will be ignoring this fixed cost in the long run, then definitely it will bring a loss to your company, right. So, this policy is usually to keep your prices low in the market and to enter into the market where the other dominant players are also playing a dominant role. So, if you want to enter into that market with the lower pricing policy, so in that case you usually refer to the marginal cost pricing, right. You ignore the fixed cost at that point of time and make out your pricing decision based on this variable cost, and that is why this is also called as variable cost pricing, right. But again, like I said, it is suitable for the short run, it is not applicable for the longer period of time. Then we have target return pricing. Now, target return pricing is a comparatively a little different from the cost plus pricing, almost the criteria which we are using here is almost similar, but how we are differentiating it with the cost plus pricing in the manner where we are target return pricing is also considering the average cost, right. We calculate the average cost of that product, but here the target which we are expecting are based on rationality, right. Here we are making the markup, whatever the markup we are adding to the average cost was done randomly, right. There is no kind of a consideration, we are not making much. Irrational decisions can be taken. Suppose if we would like to have this much of return on my commodity, or I should be getting this much of return on my product. So, irrational decisions we are making, deciding on the markup of that return, then that is the cost plus pricing, whereas in target return prices the rational decisions are being made up by the producers or the manufacturers regarding the rate of return should be there for their commodity, and that usually based on their experiences, that based on the consumer paying capacity and all the rational variables, right. So, this is how a company go ahead with the different pricing policies based on the cost. I hope it is clear to every one of you. Now, moving ahead, we have pricing based on firm's objective, right. Like I discussed it earlier, firm's objectives again plays a very important role, and there can be different objectives of the firm for which they are operating, right. There can be an objective of a firm which is working for the profit maximization. The profit is almost there for every organization, because without earning profit it will be difficult for the firm to continue growing, right. So, for the growth and for the expansion of the business, profit is always been required, but yes, looking at your objective, for what objective you are running your business, that will be different, right. So, some people are running their business only for the maximization of their profit, some of the people are running their business so that they can have more of sales maximization rather than looking at the profit. And because of change in the modern management, right, because we have different identities in the people, owners are different from the managers, right, management plays a different role. So, here managers looks more of the maximization of profit, because that will help them to have better salaries in the market, right. And then we have growth maximization also, we have managerial utility maximization also. I hope all of you remember the theories which we have discussed in our previous sessions, but now for here pricing based on firm's objective, we have two objectives which we are keeping into consideration. If suppose the firm is having an objective of maximizing profit, right, they only want to have profit maximization. So in that case, usually the firm go with the cost plus pricing or the target return pricing, because here they have some kind of a target in their mind which they actually want on their on their product. Okay. So they go ahead with the cost plus pricing, where they look at the average cost of the product, what is the total cost they have incurred, and what kind of markup they want to add to it for their returns in the profit, okay, or the target return they set. Whereas for the sales maximization, because the objective here is to increase the sale of the commodity, and the sale of the commodity will be increased if the prices are low, and on that lower prices if larger demand will be there. So usually they go with this marginal cost pricing, right. They usually follow this marginal cost pricing, where they for the some time ignore the full cost and they only keep into account the variable cost of the product, so that they can keep the lower prices of their commodity or their product, and with this lower prices they would be able to maximize their sales, right. So depending upon the firm objective, pricing policies used by the different firms can be different. Then another criteria can be the competition. Yes, this is a very important criteria, the degree of competitions, right, and degree of competitions we have already discussed in our different market structures. We have seen that different markets have different sort of competition, like in perfect competition, right, competitive market, large number of buyers and sellers are there. But yes, in perfect competition we usually not talk about this pricing decision, because the firms working under perfect competitive market are the price taker, right. They take the prices from the market forces with the determination of demand and supply. But when we talk about monopoly, monopolistic competitive market and oligopoly market, they are all price maker, right. So without considering the competition, right, without looking at the degree of competition they are having, they cannot determine the prices of their commodity. So here we have three ways, or you can say strategies, through which the prices can be determined. The first is called as penetration pricing. Now penetration pricing is that kind of a method where firms try to keep very low price initially for their commodity, so that they would be able to enter into a new market, and this has been used by those companies where there are already the dominant players in the market. And if you are willing to enter into this market and to to have a sale for your demand for your commodity, you need to keep your prices low, so that people can shift their demand to your product, right. And here we can take an example of Reliance, right. Reliance, you can see the revolution or the change taken up by the Reliance in the telecom industry, where BSNL used to play a very dominant role, right. So by keeping the prices low, they enter into the market and they have made a lot of change into that market. The another example can be Nirma. Nirma also used this penetration pricing policy, because the market which was largely captured by the Hindustan Lever Limited, right. So the Nirma, when they entered into the market, they opted this penetration pricing policy, where they have reduced their prices considerably and kept their prices based on the marginal costing, so that they will be able to enter the market and capture the demand in the market. Then we have another policy which is called as entry deterring pricing, right. Entry deterring pricing, if you guys remember, this is the policy usually taken up by the oligopoly firms, right. And we have seen that in this market, though there is no restrictive entry, but still they create a barrier for the other player to enter into this market, right. And how do they use this pricing policy? They basically the firms operating under this part, they are operating their business at a larger scale, and we have seen that working on the larger scale, companies get economies of scale, and because of these economies of scale, they were able to reduce their cost of production, their per unit cost of production reduces, right. So they usually keep those prices for their product where they do not allow anybody to enter into the market, because if anybody else wants to enter into the market, they won't be able to provide that commodity at a lower prices which they are already offering, right. So nobody is able to enter into this market because of the prices which you are providing in the market. That means you are stopping others to enter into this market, okay. And this is called as entry deterring pricing, where you are creating a barrier for the other companies to enter by providing the product at a lower prices by operating at the large scale, and usually this happens in the oligopoly market. Then we have going rate pricing. Going rate pricing, I hope this is clear to every one of you with the name itself. As you can see, we have juice packets having the similar prices for different companies, or you can talk about the pasteurized milk. Why the mineral water of different companies usually labeled with the same prices? Because here people, those who are entering new to the market, they do not want to get into any kind of difficult situation, right. So, they usually follow the same pricing strategy which is being followed earlier by the competitors, right. And there are different reasons for doing it, because they know their product are very close substitute. So, if they would be using the different pricing policy, then how much shift there will be in their demand curve, they are not clear with that. So, usually they prefer to go with the same price which is already there in the market, and to stop any kind of a price war, they follow the same pricing policy which is already there, which is called as going rate prices. So, these are the different prices which we are considering based on the competition in the market. Penetration pricing policy, where the firms try to enter with a very low price and then try to create their market share in the market demand for their product, right. And we have taken the example of Reliance to make it understood, right, how they have tried to change the market of India in the telecom industry, right. Then we have entry tethering pricing. Entry tethering prices is that policy where usually large firm keep the lower prices of their product, so that they does not allow any new player to enter into the market. And going rate pricing says that here the firms, they enter into the market, but they usually keep the same pricing policy which is already there in the market, right. Now, let us look at the another category where we have product life cycle based pricing. As we all know, each and every product has their own life cycle. As it is being shown here, we have shown here the 4 phases of any product, right, based on the time period when the product was introduced initially, right. So, that is basically the introduction phase, where the product is new to the people and many of them are not aware of, right. This is the stage where the product is being introduced, right. And then is the growth rate. This is the growth rate and where the people are aware of the product by the sort of advertisement or the sales promotion techniques. You have made that product known to the people, and the people are ready to buy this product. So, this is basically the growth period where you are able to see the lot of demand for your commodity, right. Then there comes a maturity phase, which is also called as saturation phase, right. Here in this stage the products mature and it demands also become stable. So, here you use some kind of techniques where you try to attract people to your product by using some sales promotion techniques, right, by giving them buyback discount, or you provide them different kind of offers, right. So, that you would be able to stabilize the demand for your product. And then comes the declining phase. Here in this phase the product's demand goes down, as because there is no further attraction towards the purchase of that commodity, right. So, there can be a declining phase, and then as we all know, all the companies are working very hard on the research and development of the commodity. So, if they are adding something new to that product during this maturity or stabilization phase, then definitely they will not able to face this demand phase, declining phase, and they will able to create a better demand for their product in the market. So, this is about the product life cycle. Now, what we are going to understand here is, let us look at the pricing decisions which are being made based on the different cycle or based on the different phases of the product and during this life cycle. So, the very first is called as price skimming. The very first policy is called as price skimming, and here in this method, what is being done, usually when the product is new to the market, right, when you have come up with any innovative or new product in the market, then you use this policy which is called as price skimming policy, where you keep your prices very high in the market, and there are customers, right. Here using this policy, you need to take care of that there are people who are ready to pay higher prices for the commodity, so as they could be able to create their social status in the market. Remember the example of mobile phone, right. When new mobile phone came into the market with the camera and with all the other features, earlier they were not there. So, they were charged very high, right, and usually this happens with those products which are new to the market, the kind of technology they are coming up with, right, is new to the market and people are ready to pay higher prices for these commodities, right. So, price skimming is one such method where usually the higher prices are being charged, right, to basically to take the skim of the market, right, and then you would be able to generate more profit during those phases of the commodity. You can also take the example of movie, latest movie which comes up, right. So, usually what happens for the very initial days, right, when the movie was released. So, initial days the price of the movie ticket will be higher as compared to the price which we charge for the later days. So, here we are also representing this graph which represent this price skimming, right. So, here this particular line is basically representing that demand is inelastic during this period, because this is the steeper demand curve, and this curve represents that demand is of elastic nature, because this demand curve is a little flatter, right. So, when we are charging the higher prices, what we are saying, the demand for our product is of inelastic nature, because here the product is not being considered or the prices are not being considered much. So, there are customers who are ready to pay the higher prices for producing the quantity of that commodity. Definitely the number of consumers are lesser, but yes, they would be able to buy the commodity at the higher prices. Okay. So, this is a inelastic demand curve, whereas when the product become common in the market, and when we can reduce the prices to attract more customer to our demand, to the demand of our commodity. So, we see that the demand is also having this elastic curve, where we are selling the commodity, same commodity after a period of time at a lesser price, so that we can have more customers to buy that commodity, right. So, this is how the different pricing methods can be used at different stages of a product. Okay. So, this is your price skimming policy. Then we have product bundling. Product bundling is basically being done when you are bundling your product with the another product or packaging, right. You are bringing some kind of change to your product, or you are bundling your product with the another product, where you would be able to and this is usually done at the stage of maturity, when your product reaches to the maturity level and does not have much demand. So, what you do is you bundle your product with the another product, which gives an impression to the customer that they are buying only one product, or they are paying for one product, and in return they are getting two products, right. So, that definitely helps you stimulate the demand of your product in the market, right. So, product bundling is a way where you are providing two products to the consumers at one prices. Of course, the price of the another product is being included, but yes, definitely when you are doing these things, this will also helps in promoting the another product, maybe which you have started new product, which you are giving as an complementary to your previous product, and consumer might feel that here they are getting two commodities at a single price, right. Then we have perceived value pricing also, which is also called as psychological pricing, right. In this, what happen, usually the people, the producers create that kind of a value image of their product in the market. So, the consumer perceive the value of that commodity, and accordingly they are ready to pay for those prices, which is also be called as psychological prices. Like we can take an example of Tanishq jewelry, we can take an example of Titan watches, right. So, all these branded have created their value in the market, right, even if their product cost is not that much, because here the cost is not based on the cost of production, the price is not based on the cost of the production, the price is based on the perceived value of that product, right. So, how much branding you were able to do for your product, so that the consumer have perceived that value for your commodity and ready to pay the prices accordingly. So, here you can definitely charge higher prices for your commodity if the perceived value of that commodity is higher in the market. Then we have value pricing. Now, value pricing is a little different from this perceived value pricing. What happen here in this case, usually the producer creates a value for their product definitely in the market, but at times they are also providing this product at a lower prices, right. So, what is the perception of consumer here is, the perception of consumer here is that product is of value, right, product does have a value, of a commodity, but the prices which they are paying is comparatively lesser. And you can take an example of coutons in this very easily, right, because they have created so much value of their product, but once the person is buying their product, they provides good discount on those products, and which gives the feels to the customer that they are buying the valued product at the lesser prices, right. So, this is a kind of again a psychological impact you are trying to create on the commodity, on the mind of the consumer, right. Perceived value, here you are creating the higher value and you are also selling the product at the higher price, whereas in value pricing you are creating the value of the product, but you are providing that product on a value price, right, where they are feeling that as if they are paying value for their money, or they are getting value of their money in return, whatever they are buying. And then we have loss leader pricing. Loss leader pricing is usually opted by the firms who are producing multiple products, right, where in case of one commodity, right, they are charging the higher price, and from the other product they are charging the low price, right. So, this is a loss leader pricing strategy which can be used by the firms, right, to find out if there is more demand of any commodity. So, that particular product they are pricing high in the market, and the another commodity they are pricing low in the market, right. So, let us move to the next, where we have cyclical pricing. As we know, in our economy we faces different cycles, right. There are different business cycles. Some we have economic expansion phase as well, and we go through the recession phase also. So, during those different phases of the business cycle, what kind of pricing strategy should be followed by the firm, that we are going to understand here under the cyclical pricing, right. Expansion is the phase which we need to understand, where the income of the consumer increases because the demand of the commodity increases, and because the demand increases, production of the good increases, which generates the employment in the economy, and the generation of employment gives more income, right, and with the higher income people can demand more of goods and services. So, this is the expansion phase when economy is going upward, right. And we also need faces this recession phase, because we are never in a single phase, right. It keeps on changing, right, and recession phase is just an opposite of an expansion phase, where the demand of goods and services decreases, which reduces the production, and reduction is in production creates unemployment, and then unemployment situation will be there if then people will get less income, or they are not left with any income. So, again the demand will go down. So, on looking at the different phases of the economy, there can be different pricing strategy. One is the rigid pricing strategy, and the other is a flexible pricing strategy. Since we are talking about the pricing of an individual firm, and we know that prices does not operate in isolation, right, we need to take into account whatever the changes are taking place in the economy, and for that reason we have understood that nature of managerial economics is micro in nature, but it gives an adequate importance to macroeconomics, because we need to take into account all the effects which are taking place at macro level, right, what impact they are going to create at micro level. So, rigid pricing policy says that a firm will not get any benefit by changing the prices of the commodity, even if the economy goes down or economy goes up, right. So, that is what rigid pricing policy says, and this is true for some of the durable goods also, because in case if there are consumer durable goods, the demand of those goods which can be shifted for future, then in that case this rigid pricing policy is better, because in that case even if you are reducing the price during the recession, people will not make a purchase and they will wait for further reduction in the prices. So, definitely the firm will not get any benefit, right. So, they can go ahead with the rigid pricing policy. Even in an interview with NDTV, the CEO of PepsiCo, Indra Nui, because she is taking care of FMCG products, right, she stated that there is no change we are going to make, it is better rather than not to have a flexible pricing during this expansion or recession phase. It is always better to improve on the quality of the commodity, right, to increase the sale, right. So, that is what is being considered to be as a rigid pricing policy, where the firm is not going to get any benefit by reduction or by increase in the price, even if there are different phases taking place in the economy. Whereas, flexible pricing suggests that flexible pricing policies can be taken up during the different phases of the economy, because like I said, during the expansion phase the income capacity of the people are more, right, because their income are increasing. So, you can definitely charge higher pricing during this phase. This can be done with the agriculture products also, or FMCG products also, because here people are ready to pay more for their demands, whereas during the recession phase firms should follow the reducing pricing strategies if they want to stabilize the demand for their commodity. So, that depends upon the nature of commodity again, whether the firm should go with the rigid pricing policies or they should opt flexible pricing strategy for the different phases of the economy. Then let us move to the next part, where we have multi-product pricing. What happens or what kind of decisions a firm is going to make whenever they are producing more than one commodity, when they are producing multiple products, right. And this multiple pricing policy we are talking about where the firms are producing multiple products which are related to each other, right. We are not talking about those companies which are into conglomerate business, rather we are talking about those those companies which are into concentric business, where their products are related to each other, they are close substitute of each other, or they are complementary products. So, here we have three ways of determining the prices or deciding the prices, like we have demand dependence, right, where there is an demand interdependence. Okay. See, the company which is providing the product, where the demand of that product is interdependent, right. So, in case of substitutes, as we all know, substitutes are those goods which are demanded together, right, which can be used in place of one another, which are substitute of each other. So, company if they are offering substitutes of their product, like Coca-Cola, they have two substitutes, Coke and Pepsi. So, it is better for them to have the similar pricing policy for both the commodities, because if they are reducing the price of one commodity, that will definitely affect the demand of that commodity, because their substitute is available, right. So, you need to understand what kind of relationship is there, what kind of demand interdependence is there in your product. But if you are supplying a complementary good, if your product are of complementary nature, like you can talk about printer and cartridge, right. So, if demand of one commodity will increase, then definitely the demand for another commodity will also increase. But if the demand of one commodity will decrease in case of complementary goods, then the price or demand of the other commodity will also reduces, right. So, complementary goods also has to be taken into account while making this pricing decision, what impact it is going to create on the another commodity. So, different decisions are being taken up by the firm depending upon the demand interdependence, and this is usually being done by those companies where the demand of their products which they are offering in the market are of interdependence nature. Then we have supply interdependence also, right. There are firms who are producing different products, and the factors of productions they are using for the production of different commodities are almost same or similar, right. So, if you are producing maybe cars, right, if you are producing cars, so the production of maybe one car, if you talk about Honda, yeah, Honda company, so the production of Honda City and the production of this Honda Zez requires the same kind of a production process, right. So, here there is a interdependence of supply. So, when there is an interdependence of supply, the firm has to take into account how they are going to price their product depending upon the cost which they are including in the process of decision making, because cost plays a very important role. But here, as because you are using different product different commodities and using the same factors of production, then in that case definitely you can charge different prices of your product. And here we have this Ramsey pricing policy. This Ramsey pricing policy is introduced by Frank Ramsey, and according to Frank Ramsey, this pricing policy was introduced usually for the government taxation purpose, right, where government takes different decisions on charging different taxes on the commodity. And as per this method, usually we say that government should charge more taxes on inelastic goods, right. When the goods are of inelastic nature, then it is always advisable for the government to charge higher taxes, because here the demand is of inelastic nature. Even if the price of that commodity increases, the demand will not decrease. Whereas in case of elastic goods, government should keep the lower pricing strategy. Same is the case of the supply interdependence. It is better to charge higher price for the commodity where the demand is higher, right, and when the demand is lesser, one should charge the lesser pricing strategy. Then we have input output relationship also. Input output relationship, some companies are also having their input output relationship. We can also take the example of Tata here. Tata is also producing steel and Tata is also manufacturing car, right, cars and trucks, and for the production of car and trucks we require steel as a raw material. So, here we have input output relationship. So, usually the companies what they do is they supply raw material to their own companies, right. One company product is used as a raw material for the another company product, right. So, here transfer pricing is usually being used, where companies are transferring their product to their own subsidiaries at a lesser prices. But yes, on transfer pricing there are certain rules and regulations taken up by the government, because usually the companies are opting this kind of strategy to save their taxes, right, and which is not again a good practice. So, there are certain laws, there are certain regulations which are being taken up by the government to control over the transfer pricing. Moving ahead, we have this retail pricing. Retail pricing can be done in different ways as well, like we have everyday low pricing strategy. Retailing is something which we already know. We have two different distribution network, one is the wholesaler and the other one is retailer, and retailer, as we all know, is in the direct touch with the customer, and through this retailer the product reaches to the customer. So, how these retailers are going to charge the prices from the customer, adding their commission to that particular commodity. So, some of the retailers use this everyday low pricing strategy, where they are keeping the lower prices of their product on regular basis, and we can take an example of Walmart here, right, and an Indian company, Indian retailer Big Bazaar also get success with this everyday lower pricing strategies while operating at the large scale, right, and this lower price strategy is only possible when the firm is operating at the large scale, when the retailer is doing the business at the large scale, where they are able to reduce their cost of sale, and therefore, they are able to make it available at the lower prices. Then we have high to low pricing strategies also used by the retailer, where they are selling their commodity on the higher prices on regular basis, but during few occasions, right, during the festival season they offer low prices as well to attract the customers toward their product, right. And then we have value pricing also, though we have discussed this value pricing earlier, but retailer also use this value pricing, where they try to charge the prices as per the value perceived by the consumer, so that they get a feel that they are getting return of their product, return of their money which they are providing. Then we have also these other pricing method. This is the peak load pricing method, which is usually been done on the basis of time frame. So, when we charge higher prices, we call it as an peak load, and when we charges the lesser prices, we call it as an off peak load, right. So, that means as we already know, different charges are being taken up, or different prices are being kept for the prices depending upon the different time frame, like demand for air condition is more during the summer. So, during summer they will be charged high, and during the winters their demand will reduce. So, definitely at that time you can charge lower prices. Then we have sealed bid pricing strategy. Sealed bid pricing strategy is a kind of a pricing strategy which is usually being taken up in a market where there is a situation of monopsony, where we have a single buyer and lot of suppliers are there, and this strategy is usually been done for the government projects, where you are offering the price of your commodity in a sealed envelope, right. But what prices you should be quoting, that depends upon the price of your competitors, as you do not know the price of your competitors. So, you always try to keep the lower prices of your product, so that you would be able to get that tender or the order or the project of the government, so that you would be able to continue with that. But this is again a strategy which has to be done very carefully. You do not know the price of your competitor, but definitely you can go and you can also look at the strategies which they are framing, so that you can get an idea and accordingly you can quote your prices. Then there we have the administered pricing also. Administered pricings are being administered by the government. Government take a charge of certain prices, and irrespective of the cost, they keep into account of the price of certain commodities like sugarcane, like coal in the industry, right, so like petrol. So these are the price which are administered by the government, and they decide the prices, what should be the prices of those commodities, looking into consideration, and that these are the public utility products. Then we have export pricing. Export pricings are related to the pricing when the companies are involved into import and export, when we are selling a product to the another country. So here we have to take into account different considerations, because we might be sure enough about the things happening in our market, but when we are exporting our product to the another country, we need to take account different aspects, right. We need to take care of exchange rate policy, the rate of currency in the different market, right, about the elasticity and inelasticity of that product. So different considerations are needed to be taken care of while we are talking about export pricing, and how we would be able to increase our export, that thing has to be taken up into consideration. Then last we have international price discrimination and dumping. Price discrimination, as we have already discussed, is a art of selling the same commodity to different people at different prices, and this is possible only when there are different elasticities in the market, and when we are able to divide our market into 2 or more markets, right. So internationally we can also charge different prices for the commodity depending upon the demand aspects in those countries, and dumping is basically referring to exporting your product in bulk to the other country, and here the perspective of doing dumping is different, because people usually want to reduce their volume of output, right, from their country to the another country, so that they can charge higher prices. So this is sometimes also being monitored by the government, right, whether the firms are getting into the practice of dumping or not. So these are some pricing methods which we have discussed, right, and these pricing methods I hope are all clear to every one of you, how different pricing methods and strategies are being used up by the firms, right, to understand what should be the right price of your product, and we have talked about these different pricing methods based on different criterias. So I believe this is all clear to every one of you, and if we look at the reference book for today's class, these are the reference books which are being taken up. So thank you everyone.